The night my dog went missing. The night was cold, and the wind howled through the trees. James pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he stood on his porch, looking out into the dark woods. His dog, Max, had run off nearly an hour ago, and there was still no sign of him. Max never did this before. He was a loyal German shepherd, always staying close to James. But tonight, something had scared him. One moment, Max was sitting by his side, and the next, he took off, barking wildly, disappearing into the thick forest. James grabbed a flashlight and stepped off the porch. "Max," he called, his voice echoing through the silence. "Come back, boy." Only the sound of the wind answered him. The forest ahead looked darker than usual, almost unnatural. A strange feeling settled in James' chest. Something wasn't right. He moved forward, his boots crunching on the dried leaves. The light from his flashlight flickered slightly, as if struggling to stay on. James frowned and tapped it, but the beam remained weak. The woods felt different tonight. Too quiet. No crickets, no rustling of small animals. Just emptiness. Then, in the distance, he heard it. A low humming sound. It was faint at first, almost like a vibration in the air. Then it grew louder. James froze. The sky above him glowed for a second, a strange silver light flashing through the trees. He looked up, his heart pounding. But just as quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, swallowed by the night. A shiver ran down his spine. What was that? He shook his head. This was not the time to think about strange lights. He needed to find Max. James walked deeper into the woods, his flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. His calls for Max grew more urgent. "Max, come on, boy, where are you?" Then, suddenly, a noise, a rustling sound, something moving behind the bushes. James turned sharply, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Max." The bush trembled, and then a figure stepped out. James felt his breath catch in his throat. It was Max. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a girl. She looked about 15, but something about her was not normal. Her hair was long and silver, almost glowing in the dim light. Her eyes were deep blue, brighter than any human's. Her clothes were strange, like something from a futuristic movie. Dark material with glowing silver patterns on the arms. Max stood close to her, his posture relaxed, his tail wagging gently. He trusted her. James didn't move. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low. The girl just stared at him. James took a cautious step forward. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The girl blinked but said nothing. Then, before James could ask again, she did something that made his stomach twist. She reached down and held Max's paw. Not like a person petting a dog, not like a friendly gesture. She held his paw like they were equals. James' pulse quickened. This didn't make sense. Who was she? And why was Max acting like they had known each other forever? The girl tilted her head slightly, as if studying James. Her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, and for a brief second, James felt something strange, like a whisper in his mind. A voice. Soft. Echoing. "Danger is coming." James stiffened. His skin turned cold. Who said that? His voice was barely a whisper. The girl's lips didn't move. She simply looked at him, then down at Max. The dog's ears twitched as if he had heard it too. The air around them suddenly felt heavy. James turned his flashlight toward the trees. Something moved in the shadows. A shape. Tall. Too tall for a human. Watching them. James' heart pounded. Max growled, stepping in front of the girl protectively. James gripped his flashlight tighter. His instincts screamed at him. They were not alone. And whatever was out there, it was looking for her. She's not from this world. The house was silent, but James couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment over and over. The silver-haired girl, the way Max held onto her, and the voice in his head whispering, "Danger is coming." Max lay curled up near the foot of the bed, his body pressed close to the girl. It was strange. He never let strangers this close. But this girl wasn't just any stranger. James sat on the edge of his bed, watching them. The girl didn't move, but her eyes remained open, glowing softly in the darkness. She wasn't asleep. She was waiting. James cleared his throat. "Who are you?" The girl blinked, then tilted her head, just like Max did when he was curious. "I don't understand," James muttered. He tried again. "What's your name?" For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, inside his mind, the same soft voice whispered, "Luraya." James inhaled sharply. She was speaking directly into his head. He glanced at Max, who remained calm, as if this was normal. His tail thumped lightly against the floor. James turned back to the girl. "Luraya, where are you from?" Luraya's glowing blue eyes darkened. She opened her mouth slightly, but no sound came out. Instead, her fingers brushed over Max's fur, and her silver markings lit up. Max didn't flinch. Instead, his eyes flickered, just for a second, as if something passed between them. James felt his stomach twist. "What did you just do?" Luraya finally spoke aloud for the first time. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper in the wind. "He understands more than you." James frowned. "Understands what?" Luraya lifted her hand and pointed at the window. "Them." James turned. At first, he saw nothing but darkness outside. Then, slowly, his heart stopped. The trees were moving. Not from the wind, not from animals, from something else. Shapes lurked between the shadows, tall, thin, watching. James' breath hitched. He wasn't imagining things last night. Something really was out there. "Who are they?" he whispered. Luraya's fingers clenched onto Max's fur. Her markings dimmed, as if draining of energy. "Hunters." A chill ran down James' spine. "They're looking for you." Luraya didn't answer. She didn't need to. James grabbed his jacket, his hands slightly shaking. His mind screamed at him to get out, to leave this girl behind. But then he looked at Max. Max wasn't afraid. He was ready. His ears were perked, his body tense, his sharp eyes locked on the window. He had already chosen his side. James took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered. "If they want you, they'll have to go through us." The air outside grew still. Then, the power in the house went out. A deep hum vibrated through the walls. Something was coming. The hunters in the dark. The night was silent. Too silent. James stood by the window, his breath shallow. The power was out, but the air hummed, like a deep vibration, rattling through his bones. Max was already on his feet, ears perked, body stiff. Luraya stood behind him, her glowing blue eyes locked on the darkness outside. James clenched his fists. "How many?" he whispered. Luraya didn't blink. "Enough." Outside, the trees swayed, though there was no wind. Shadows moved, flickering like something unnatural. Then, a sound, a high-pitched frequency, piercing and sharp. James winced, covering his ears. Max snarled, his fur bristling. Luraya didn't move, but her silver markings flared, glowing brighter than before. James turned to her. "What's happening?" Luraya exhaled. "They're searching." James frowned. "For what?" She finally looked at him. "For my thoughts." A chill ran down James' spine. He didn't understand, but he knew one thing: they had to move. Then the front door clicked open. Not burst, not slammed, just clicked. James turned sharply, heart pounding. The door slowly creaked open, revealing the blackness outside. Max lunged forward, teeth bared, but there was nothing there. James swallowed hard. "They're inside." Luraya stepped closer to Max. Her silver markings pulsed. James grabbed a baseball bat from behind the couch. It felt useless, but he gripped it anyway. He wasn't going down without a fight. The room filled with an eerie silence. Then, a whisper. Not in words, not in a voice. A whisper inside their minds. Give her to us, and we will leave. James' grip tightened. Not happening. The whisper turned colder. You cannot protect her. Luraya stepped forward, standing between James and the open doorway. He doesn't have to. For the first time, James saw fear in the hunter's movements. Then Luraya lifted her hands, and the entire house shook. The shadows screeched. The power flickered back on. James blinked against the sudden brightness. The creatures outside vanished into the trees. The air went still. Max let out a low growl, but he didn't move from Luraya's side. James exhaled shakily. What was that? Luraya lowered her hands. Her silver markings dimmed again. They will come again, she said softly. But now they know. James wiped the sweat from his brow. Know what? Luraya finally looked at him. That I'm not alone. James met her gaze. Neither was he. And for the first time, he realized, this fight wasn't just hers anymore. It was his too. The truth about her past. A house smelled like burnt wires. The lights flickered weakly, buzzing in protest, but the real damage wasn't to the power. It was to James' reality. He sat on the floor, his back against the couch, staring at the silver-haired girl across from him. Luraya. Max lay between them, his head resting on his paws, eyes still locked on the door as if the creatures might return at any moment. His breathing was steady, but his muscles were tense, ready to fight again. James ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what had just happened. You need to explain, he finally said. Now. Luraya watched him for a moment. Her glowing blue eyes dimmed slightly, as if deciding how much to tell. Then she reached into her sleeve and pulled something out. A small metallic disc. She placed it on the coffee table. The moment it touched the surface, it came to life. A soft hum filled the air, and then, images. They hovered above the disc like a hologram, shifting, glowing. James leaned forward, eyes widening. What is this? Luraya's voice was quiet. My world. The projection showed a vast planet, bathed in silver and blue, with towering spires that stretched into the sky. The ground shimmered as if covered in liquid metal. Strange, elegant creatures moved through the city, some humanoid, some not. James felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't a dream. She was really from somewhere else. But then, the image changed. The beautiful city was burning. Ships flew overhead, firing blue energy beams that turned the buildings into dust. Creatures ran for their lives. And in the middle of it, Luraya. She was younger, standing in the ruins, her silver markings glowing brightly as a group of figures surrounded her. James felt a lump form in his throat. What happened? Luraya didn't look away from the projection. I was created to be a weapon. James blinked. What? Luraya's fingers hovered over the image. My kind are born with abilities. But I was different, stronger. Her voice was almost mechanical, as if she had told this story many times before. They wanted to use me, train me, make me fight their war. Max lifted his head, ears twitching. But you ran, James guessed. Luraya nodded. I refused. I escaped. I came here. James exhaled, staring at the flickering projection. And those things hunting you. Her glowing eyes locked onto his. They are my people. They want me back. James gritted his teeth. Not happening. Luraya studied him, tilting her head slightly. You are strange, human. James scoffed. Yeah. Well, you're not the first to say that. But before she could respond, Max suddenly stood up, ears alert. A hologram fizzled out. The house went dead silent. James instinctively reached for the baseball bat again. What now? Luraya took a slow step back. Her silver markings dimmed. "They're coming," she whispered. Max growled, standing between them and the door. James tightened his grip on the bat, his pulse hammering. "Then let's make sure they regret it." Loraya looked at him, eyes filled with something different this time. Hope. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. The final warning. The night air was thick with electricity. Not the kind that made hair stand on end, but the kind that made hearts pound with dread. James could feel it. Something was watching them. He gripped the steering wheel tightly as the truck rumbled down the empty road. Max sat in the passenger seat, ears flicking back and forth, his nose twitching at every unfamiliar scent. Loraya was in the back, staring up at the sky, her glowing blue eyes scanning for something only she could see. They had left the house behind. Staying wasn't an option. Not after what had happened. The lights, the whispers, the way the shadows had stepped inside like they belonged there. James swallowed hard. Where are we even going? Loraya didn't look away from the sky. Somewhere safer. James huffed. You'll have to be more specific than that. They found you at my house, which means they can find you anywhere. So unless you have a... Crack. The truck jerked violently as something slammed into the roof. James barely kept control as the vehicle skidded on the road. Max barked, snapping his teeth at the ceiling. Loraya pressed her hand against the seat, steadying herself as the truck finally came to a stop. James' breath was ragged. What the hell was that? Then, the roof dented inward. Something was on top of them. Max snarled, ready to attack. Loraya's markings flickered, pulsing with an urgent glow. James reached for the door handle, but before he could react, the windshield turned black. Not shattered. Blacked out. Like something had erased the glass, leaving behind only emptiness. Then the voice came. Inside their heads. "We warned you, human." James felt his mind splitting, like cold hands were digging into his thoughts. "She does not belong to you." Max whimpered, his growl turning into a pained whine. James clenched his jaw, fighting against the invasion. "Get out of my head." Loraya pressed her hands to her temples, her markings flaring bright silver. And then she screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was something ancient, something powerful. The air around them rippled, like the world itself had been shaken. The pressure in James' skull vanished. The windshield reappeared. And the thing on the roof. Gone. Silence filled the truck. Only the sound of their breathing remained. James slumped against the seat. His hands were shaking. What the hell was that? Loraya's voice was barely above a whisper. The final warning. James turned to her. What do you mean? Loraya looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. If I don't go with them, they will burn this world to the ground. James' heart pounded. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone. And the war had already begun. The ultimate stand. The night sky ripped apart. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't an explosion. It was something bigger. James stood frozen, staring at the sky above the empty road. A massive crack of light split through the darkness, like reality itself was breaking open. The air hummed, vibrating deep in his chest. Loraya's eyes widened. They're here. James clenched his fists. We know. But this time, it wasn't just the hunters. It was a warship. It descended silently, the sheer size of it blotting out the stars. Not sleek, not elegant. This was a machine of war, a hovering beast of steel and shadow, humming with alien energy. Max growled, standing protectively in front of Loraya. His golden fur bristled, his stance firm. He had chosen his side. The ship pulsed. A low vibration rippled through the ground, making the truck tremble. And then, they stepped out. Figures materialized like shadows melting into solid form. Tall, silver-eyed, cloaked in dark armor. The leader took a step forward, his gaze locked onto Loraya. Enough, child. The words weren't spoken. They arrived in James' head like a cold whisper. "Come with us, or this world will burn." James tightened his grip on the shotgun he pulled from the truck. His hands were steady. "No." The leader's head tilted. Amused. "You are insignificant." Max let out a deep, thunderous growl. Lyraya's silver markings flared like fire. And then everything exploded into motion. The first blast came from nowhere. A blue streak of energy that barely missed James' head. He dove behind the truck, heart hammering. Max lunged, his body a blur of golden fury. His jaws clamped onto the nearest hunter's arm, but instead of flesh, he met armor that cracked under his bite. Lyraya stepped forward, lifting both hands. Her silver markings ignited, and the entire warship trembled. James peeked over the truck, just in time to see something impossible. Max was changing. His fur shimmered, turning almost metallic. His muscles rippled with unearthly strength. His eyes glowed, silver like Lyraya's. And in that moment, James understood. Lyraya had awakened something ancient inside him. Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a guardian. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Energy blasts filled the air. James fired his shotgun, taking down one of the hunters, his first kill, but he didn't have time to think about it. Lyraya moved like a storm, her hands controlling the very air. The ship cracked. The ground quaked. Max tore through the enemy, faster than any human could follow. His new strength made him unstoppable. The leader snarled, lifting one arm. A weapon formed from his own body, twisting into a jagged, pulsating blade. He charged at Lyraya. James' blood ran cold. Max. But Max was already moving. Faster than thought, faster than light, he intercepted the blow. The blade struck his side. Sparks flew. But Max did not fall. He turned, eyes glowing silver, teeth bared like a god of war. And with a single, earth-shattering leap, he tore the leader to the ground. The remaining hunters hesitated. They had never seen anything like this. And that was their mistake. Lyraya raised her hands. The sky above them cracked again, this time in her favor. The ship trembled. Metal twisted. Lightning rained down. The hunters didn't retreat. They ran. James staggered forward, chest heaving. The dust settled. The warship, now without a crew, hovered for a moment. Then, slowly, it faded from existence, like it had never been there. The battle was over. For now. James turned to Lyraya. She was breathing hard, her silver glow dimming. Max walked up to her, pressing his forehead against hers. Their bond was undeniable. James exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Well, that was insane. Lyraya smiled, a real smile for the first time. It's not over. James sighed. Yeah, I figured. Max wagged his tail. He was ready for whatever came next. And so was James. The final choice. The battlefield was quiet. Too quiet. James stood in the center of the destroyed road, his breath uneven. The night sky was still cracked from whatever Lyraya had done, shimmering like broken glass above them. The warship was gone. The hunters had fled. And yet, he knew it wasn't over. Max sat beside Lyraya, his fur shimmering with traces of the power she had awakened inside him. He looked at James, his silver-tinged eyes filled with something deeper than instinct. Understanding. Lyraya, barely standing, wiped blood from the corner of her mouth. The glow of her silver markings flickered weakly. James exhaled, lowering his gun. So what now? Lyraya looked up at the sky. It was no longer just dark. It was opening. A portal. James swallowed hard. Is that them? Lyraya shook her head. No. Her voice was soft, but there was something strange in it. Relief. Then he saw them. Not hunters. Not warriors. Her people. They stepped through the shimmering rift, their bodies cloaked in silver light. Unlike the ones who had hunted her, These figures felt different. Their presence wasn't suffocating, it was calm. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. His deep blue eyes locked onto Lariah. "You are safe now." Lariah's shoulders tensed. She stared at them as if she wasn't sure whether to believe it. James took a step closer, protective. "Who are you?" The tall figure studied him, almost curious. Then he looked at Max, really looked at him. A slow nod. Recognition. The Guardian awakens. James blinked. "Excuse me." Lariah turned to Max, placing a hand on his head. He didn't move. He simply let her. Her voice was softer than before. "He was never just a dog, James. He was always meant for more." James clenched his jaw. "So what does that mean?" "He just leaves with you." Lariah hesitated. The silence was heavier than before. James shook his head. "No, no way. He's my best friend. My family." His voice cracked slightly. "You don't just take him." Lariah stepped closer to him. "James," she whispered, "he is choosing, just like I am." James looked down at Max. His golden fur still shimmered faintly with that unearthly glow. His silver eyes looked up at James, loyal, unwavering. But something was different now. For the first time, James wasn't sure if Max belonged to this world anymore. Max stepped forward, pressing his head against James' chest. James closed his eyes. His hands gripped Max's fur, holding on to something that he wasn't ready to lose. "You'll come back, right?" His voice was barely a whisper. Max lifted his head, looking straight at him. A silent promise. Lariah touched James' arm gently. "This isn't goodbye." The portal behind them pulsed, shimmering. The others waited. James forced himself to step back, to let go. Max walked to Lariah's side, but he looked back, one last time. James gave him a shaky smile. "Go be a hero, buddy." And then, in a flash of silver light, they were gone. The portal vanished. The night was still again. James stood in the empty road, staring at the spot where they had just been. For the first time in years, Max wasn't by his side. The wind blew softly. The trees rustled. A deep silence settled over everything. And yet, James didn't feel alone. He looked up at the stars. Somewhere, out there, Max was still watching, still protecting, still his. And one day, he would come back.